That's how much did you say?
$100 million.
$100 million.
That's just the signing
Transfer
bonus.
fee.
Welcome to Undocked. I'm Nick Chubb.
And I'm Raal Harris.
Let's start with some major podcast news, Raal.
Okay.
My mum listens.
Your mum?
She's fan number 4.
She's the missing person. Did she give us a good review or?
Yeah, 5 stars. Yeah. 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, I think.
A taste. She's got good taste then, your mum.
Yeah.
And your mum's name is?
Caroline.
Caroline.
Say hi to her.
Caroline. Hello, Caroline. Thank you for joining us. And we hope that you enjoy maritime. You must enjoy maritime. Your mum's probably quite knowledgeable after all your Sunday lunch chats over various things you're working on, I would imagine. She's probably, and your life at sea, she's probably very seasoned. She's probably our ideal demographic, actually. So welcome, Caroline. I think my mother would not find it quite so interesting, but she'd probably give us a 5-star review. So let's work on that. That's my job for this week. Get the mothers in.
Thetis has been in business 6 years, and I'm certain my wife still doesn't really know what I do, even though she's in the industry.
She's in the industry. Well, that's
yeah.
unforgivable. That's unforgivable. What does she do in the industry?
She is head of safety for a small shipping company.
Wonderful. Well, then, again, our ideal demographic.
Demographic, but I'm pretty sure she doesn't listen.
Yeah. Well, she probably says the same thing about you. He doesn't listen.
Yeah. The reason my mum can listen, though, is that we are now everywhere you get your podcasts. So if it's Apple Podcasts or Amazon or anything like that, we've gone global. Which
is fantastic. I'm really pleased about that, as I got a real satisfaction when I saw it pop up on the Apple. It was recommended to me as well, which is good, isn't it? Yeah.
Happy days.
Before I had a chance to say I was in, I don't know, maybe it recognised me or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it's AI.
Exactly.
What have you got this week, Raal?
You may have noticed I'm sporting a little bit of a tan.
You do look quite tanned. Have you been away?
Exactly. Well, I have been away, but this has been very much topped up. This is what you might call an IMO tan. Because I was on the roof of the IMO yesterday and the sun came out. It was glorious. So yes, I was there for the Women in Shipping, the Worcester UK birthday party, 51 yesterday.
Nice.
Or at least celebrated yesterday. So lots of the great and the good coming together to celebrate women in shipping. It was a very, very nice event, and I was very, very pleased to see that this year's Women of the Year was Karen Davis of OCIMF. OCIMF, of course, representing the well, they don't call them oil majors anymore, are they? Energy majors of the world.
Yeah.
And I thought when I went to the event yesterday, I knew we were recording today, and I thought, well, I won't collect all my thoughts because I reckon something will come up. And indeed, sort of seeing Karen there, I'm a big fan of hers and what she's brought to her role. And I thought, well, actually, we talk about maritime transformation on this podcast. There is a great example of maritime transformation right there in the fact that I think Karen has really transformed OCIMF in the way that it sort of works with the rest of the industry and the team there, and the way that their dynamic seems to have really changed to me. There's a lot of great people there, but seeing them all together celebrating her success yesterday was really, was really great to see. And they're a great team.
That's nice.
And so I think there's been, she's been transformative there, transformative leader. But also, on her watch, has been one of the biggest transformations to the inspection of tankers, certainly in my lifetime of shipping, 20 years. And I suspect there's not many sort of bigger achievements than that. So this is for the uninitiated, because we are getting a broader audience of mums and so on. So this is really about the inspection regime. That this is where basically coming on board the ship inspection regime and the seafarers on board that ship. The ship itself will be inspected, to seafarers, to sort of see from a safety perspective how they're performing. And the big change was kind of around the way the inspection is conducted, a massive shift, which has been in part about technology, because they've started using an iPad, all inspectors doing that. It's data that they're able to retrieve before the inspection and all that sort of stuff. Then the collection of data while they're on there, so photographs and things like that. I think they can submit a media before the inspection as well, so the inspector can get. And what that really allows is for them to spend much more time with the crew, talking to the crew, really understanding where they're at in terms of their safety maturity and so on, and with a big dimension to there around people. So OCIMF have been really kind of developing this theme of human factors for some years now, looking at really all the things that might affect the human and their ability to make good decisions and to do things well and to perform to that excellent standard that they're looking for. And that's come into the inspection regime as well. So they look at really around the behavior of people, how they communicate, their skills, knowledge, the habits that they sort of show and all those kind of things. And the inspectors looking at that as well. So that's a massive, massive transformation.
It's a big change.
And you, if I'm right, you worked on tankers as well. So
only as a cadet, so I spent most of my cadetship on tankers, and I remember SIRE inspections very well. Although it does sound like they've changed a huge amount under this new kind of 2.0 version. It was always the cadet's job to go down and welcome the inspector on board, and you kind of big part of it was to sort of at the beginning very performatively ask the inspector for their ID. And make sure that they are who they say they are, because that's kind of at the very top of the SIRE checklist is, what's the security like on board? Are they checking IDs? And then the other part of the cadet's job was always to be very charming and chatty as you're walking the inspector up towards the bridge so that they don't spot, the rust spots. And you make sure you take the cleanest route from the deck to the bridge.
Carefree, breezy air of like...
Exactly, yeah. Like we're not massively
panicked about it. We have nothing to hide. Yeah, brilliant. Yeah.
But that human factors stuff was non-existent back then, or at least a very, very small part of it. It was much more about how the ship was kind of technically being operated. And so it's quite encouraging to hear that change, because I think if you can pass a SIRE inspection, that near enough takes you above. If you pass a SIRE inspection, you didn't particularly worry about port state control, you didn't particularly worry about flag state or class surveyors coming up the gangway. The SIRE inspection was the big one to get right.
Yeah, and still very much the case. So I did a webinar a couple of weeks back, and it was all around inspection performance. And it was really, we had inspectors there, current people who conduct IR 2.0 inspections and all other sort of inspections as well. And we did a survey of the audience to see, which of the different types of inspections are they most concerned about, or the ones they're most worried about. And it was streets ahead. Now, there's two reasons for that. I think one, it's a level right above most in terms of their expectations and what they're looking for, the level of performance they're looking for. But it's also still bedding in. So there's still going to be a lot of concern in there, because as the inspectors had an enormous amount of learning to do and sort of preparation to do to be able to conduct these kind of assessments, but also the crew to get them ready and to get them sort of feeling comfortable with that. And this is really what I want to call out, because I think this is we could talk all day about the inspection regimes, but which is perhaps a little bit off topic for this podcast. But the bit that I think is really interesting about the way that they went about it, OCIMF, was that it was a real high level of emotional intelligence in there around thinking about what this change was going to mean, how it was going to affect different stakeholders. They did a lot to win hearts and minds. They did so much listening and so much kind of like phasing in and having kind of pilot phases and working with industry really collaboratively. And that I think has been like, that's, if you think about textbooks ways to kind of go about transformation and bringing your stakeholders with you, I think it was a really first class job. So I think she was a really deserving winner.
I think there's so many case studies of digital transformation gone wrong. I think we should definitely highlight it when it goes right.
Yeah, and I think the proof is in the pudding. It's still bedding in. The other thing I would say is, just so if you're listening, you're not in the tanker world, look at the way the wind is blowing, because this is very much kind of what you'll see. If you take even bulk carriers and things like that, you start to power them with things like ammonia, then you're going to start to see, I think, much more attention to everything in the same way that it's worked for tankers. So I've been saying this for a long time, I've been banging on and on and on. Look to the tanker industry when you think about the decarb story.
It's a really interesting thing on perceived risk there, and how tankers, when I mentioned my mum right at the top of the show, when I told my mum that I was going to work on tankers, she was horrified, because in her view, the likelihood that they might just spontaneously explode one day, to her mind at least, was quite high. But actually, because the perceived risk is high, they operate so much safer. And, bulk carriers where the perceived risk is so much lower, statistically, they're much more likely to get themselves into trouble. Like the safest ships out there are LNG carriers, because if something goes wrong on them, that it would go really wrong. So it's interesting to hear you say that about ammonia, because I could see, you're absolutely right. There is precedent for operating quote unquote unsafe materials safely at sea. You've just got to find the right place in the industry to get that knowledge.
Yeah, and I think that people will say, oh, there's ammonia carriers already. What about that? But there's a difference when it comes to the difference as a cargo, because you can lock it down in a much different way than you can when it's in in an engine space and all that kind of things. So if I may, there's a sort of unintended segue here to something else. Now, we talked about in the very first episode, we'd just been to Norway, and we just talked about like the fact that ammonia is kind of coming back as a front runner and looking like a very likely candidate. And I saw two stories this week, which I think are kind of worthy of our discussion. The first, well, basically, I think I call this thematically ammonia traction in the bulk cargo sector. Okay, so very nice segue from what we were just talking about. So BHP signed a 5-year charter contract with COSCO Shipping Bulk for 2 ammonia dual-fueled Newcastle-Max bulks carriers. And those two 210,000 deadweight vessels expected to be delivered in 2028. And primarily going to be transporting iron ore from Western Australia to Northeast Asia. So that's the first story. The second one was coming back to Norway. Always, as said, always give you optimism for the energy transition. A company called Amon Maritime, and they set up a new company to order ammonia-fueled bulk carriers, and they're backed by a state grant. Okay, and so the ships are going to be called Amon Bulk 1 and Amon Bulk 2, I think, from memory. But this is basically a Capesize and a Kamsarmax vessel. So talking about big bulk carriers here. And basically, I've got a quote for you. I just wrote this one down. The Capesize and Kamsarmax segments are ideal for ammonia adoption. These vessels have high fuel consumption and operate on established routes for industrial clients with strong climate ambitions. So there's 2 or 3 things just before I hear what you have to say on this. But I think you're seeing 2 things happening here. One, these are established routes, okay? So that makes it a lot easier when you start to think about how you're going to bunker these vessels and all that sort of stuff. And the second thing is the state involvement there as well, because I think that because of the risk for individuals, for organizations to put, I think state getting involved and putting up some money to be able to kind of help this transition, I think is something that I'm expecting to see as well. But I think it's interesting that these are, say, established routes, big bulk carriers on established routes with an element of state involvement there as well.
My first thought, which is probably not the most inspiring thought, is it's just such dull names for the ships. Do you think they'll call them something more interesting when they set sail? Yeah,
I was disappointed with that.
I mean, if you're going to pioneer something, have a story to tell.
Well, but I guess it's kind of like they're establishing a bit of a brand, I think. If you actually look, I started looking through, and there's another interesting thing that I picked up on there as well, and that is an element of real specialisation as well. And that is I noticed that they've also set up a ship management in a joint venture with BSM, a specialist.
Really? Interesting.
Ship management division doing technical management, crew management. And you and I have talked about this before. The one ticket everywhere, model may be giving way when you look at some of these things. And I think it's, for a while I've been looking at, because when you look globally at decarbonisation, it's a massive problem. If you start to pick off certain routes where you can control the terminals, and you start to look at state support for building facilities and stuff like that, on long contracts, then it starts to, there's a bit of a risk there that we kind of go, well, I don't actually need to decarbonise shipping. I need to decarbonise from Western Australia to there for that very specific trade.
I definitely see a scenario where you effectively end up with a kind of death of tramp shipping, or at least in any kind of meaningful way. The earliest pioneers that I of kind of alternative fuels are going to be these established routes between port pairs. We've already got the kind of Green Corridor initiative happening globally to try and fund some of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Where you can take out that uncertainty around if you're going to go to the trouble of actually sourcing the fuel, that you've got the offtake agreements in place, you know that the demand's going to be there. That's why I think, these ships being chartered over 5 years makes so much sense, because at least there's some security created. It requires real close cooperation between ship owner, charterer, yard, whoever's going to end up supplying the fuel, and it requires long-term commitment as well, and quite a lot of capital behind it. So it's quite exciting to see that it's happening. I just wish they'd, name them more interestingly.
What was it? Should we do a naming competition as listeners? Two ammonia bulk carriers. We've still got time. They're not coming till 2028. We can still lobby for Boaty McBoatface. If you're British, you'll
put it
know
in the
what that
Spotify comments.
Is. Yeah. I'm going to actually elaborate on that,
Go on,
if I may, Nick. Well, because the people might not realise that. So there was you'll probably know this story better than me.
Boaty McBoatface was massive, wasn't it? I thought it was it became a huge international story.
Did it go international? Shut me up.
I don't know. Tell it anyway, because people might not have heard.
Well, it was was it Arctic Explorer or something like that? What kind of vessel?
It was British Antarctic Survey, the David Attenborough, their new ship.
The David Attenborough, and they put it out to the public to name it, didn't they?
Yeah,
and the British public, this is, and being the British public, the people who brought you Brexit bring you. They named the ship Boaty McBoatface. That was the. Did they actually go through with it? Can you actually look that up on Vessel Find? I can't remember.
The second choice was Sir David Attenborough, and so the Antarctic Survey said, "We'll go for number 2, thanks." But they did name one of their ROVs Boaty McBoatface. So there is a Boaty McBoatface on the David Attenborough.
Wonderful.
Named by the public.
Wonderful. The irreverent British public. Very good.
I've got quite an interesting cyber security story, if you fancy it.
I'd love it. I always love a bit of cyber security.
Yeah.
And actually, funnily enough, I was going to bring up a couple of things on cyber. So let's see where you go with this one.
All right. Okay. How observant would you say you are, Raal?
Sorry, what was that? It very much depends on how distracted I am.
That's a very honest answer.
I do very badly with close-up magic. I get very distracted by the eyebrows and stuff. Meanwhile, they're taking my watch off, that kind of thing. But why do you ask?
Do you think you would notice one extra letter in someone's email?
You're talking about like a phishing type scenario.
Yeah.
I'm quite a visual person. I do tend, if it's an email that I recognised and know well, I think I've done quite well in work-related phishing simulations and stuff like that. I'm normally okay with that. Yeah.
So
but
this was
never say never.
Story that was shared by Fiona on our team, who does the Thetis Maritime Technology Brief, which obviously I'm biased, but I think it's the best maritime technology newsletter in the market. But she shared this a couple of weeks ago, and I thought it was so good I had to bring it on here to talk about it with you. So 2 organisations are in the final stages of transferring some funds to support a youth outreach programme. They've been going back and forth, talking about it, working out all the details. And then a hacker quietly was able to kind of intercept the email conversation, and then suddenly began mimicking a real team member who was overseeing the bank transfer of this money going out to this youth development program. So everything seemed absolutely fine. Email signature was identical. The tone was the same as it had been before, because the attacker had been intercepting all the emails going back and forth. There weren't any spelling errors. The only very, very subtle difference was that the hacker had registered almost identical email address. There was one extra S in the email. Everything else was exactly the same.
In the domain name, presumably.
Yes.
So So he had total control of the domain.
If you're on your phone, unless you kind of click in to actually kind of see the from bit, not on my phone, it just shows the name of the person. Mm-hmm. So it made it basically nearly invisible to the human eye. No one noticed the discrepancy, and the attacker, posing as Amanda, guided the conversation towards confirming the bank details and then transferring £60,000 to a fraudulent account.
Wow.
It's a true story. All of the names and everything have been changed, but it's a true story. So one extra letter in an email domain can cost tens of thousands of pounds if you're just not quite vigilant enough to spot it. Isn't that mad?
Yeah. It is, and I think it's interesting in the sense that it's sort of, I feel like a little bit that cybersecurity was a very big thing that we were discussing, and people were very alert to it. And I do feel like the focus has kind of gone down a little bit. Then there was the recent sort of land-based attacks, weren't there? Was it Marks and Spencer's really hammered?
Yeah.
Which I think will have brought it back into people's minds a little bit. But funnily enough, the question that I was going to ask you was whether or not the threat is taken seriously enough at that sort of very top level. The reason I say that is I was involved in a closed door roundtable discussion last week, and there was a cybersecurity expert there, and it was, an opportunity for people to have very sort of candid discussion. And I was the last time I was really involved in cybersecurity, we were making a film back in, I think it was probably 2000, and it might have even been like 2015, 2016, Videotel days. And we were making a film with a company called Crib Security at the time. And that was where it was like really kind of laying out all of what have now become kind of standard, things to do, general hygiene thing. But it was really interesting so it was really interesting for me getting a bit of an update and listen. And as I was listening, I was just thinking, do people really get how possible this is and how many near misses? That classic in shipping, the iceberg sort of here, and then under the water, there's like this sort of massive, the number of, there's various visual representation of the number of near misses you need to be able to then have an incident or whatever. And I think there's probably things happening all the time that largely kind of, because no one's going to go like, hey everyone, we very nearly had a disaster last week. I got targeted very skillfully there with somebody pretending to be, and it's the classic thing. They know you're tired, you've been doing a deal. They know, know that you're, luckily I spotted it, but it's
my team get emails, I reckon probably 3 or 4 times a week from people claiming to be me, particularly on our kind of like admin side who do the invoicing and things like that, claiming to be me, asking for me to transfer money and all this sort of stuff. They have the benefit of knowing that I'm so tight that I would never just say pay $10,000 here. But it is shocking when you actually dig into it. I could sit down with Tanya on our team and see how many emails she gets in a month that ostensibly have come from me. And luckily, most of them aren't very sophisticated, and we've got pretty good controls in place as a business anyway. But I could absolutely see how one can just slip through the net, particularly in a big organization where you, it's harder to keep track of that stuff.
Well, it's, when it's a really targeted one, the plausibility goes, very, very high. And they're obviously looking, and this is why getting people used to the fact that that's something that could be going on, that your social medias could be getting scraped and all that sort of stuff is. But the thing that was interesting as well is that because the measures that we all kind of are doing now, the multi-factor authentication, the kind of, there are in the discussion, naturally times where people are going, I don't want to do all that, I can't, I've got no time for that. I can't do it. So I think raising these kind of stories and keeping that in mind, and the thing that always makes me very sympathetic towards any kind of security measures was a simulation that I was involved in. And I got pulled into it was with a company, I'm going to give them a plug because they did a good job, a company called MTI. And they did a simulation of what a data breach would be like, And I think when you go through something like that, I think it's brilliant because you just get such a sense of like, wow, it makes it so real, and you understand all of the kind of dimensions and stuff like that. And so I would encourage organizations to do that kind of thing, because you're going to find out where you need to improve, and you're also going to find out where you're also going to learn. It's like having a drill, right? It's the reason we make seafarers do drills, so that it's not, alien, and they know the process, they know what they've got to do and go through and stuff like that.
Drills, I think, are the most undervalued tool you can have in dealing with this stuff. So we've had a 3-year research partnership with Raal and the law firm HFW. And so for the last 3 years, we've done a big big cyber risk management survey, 200 people each year fill it out. One of the big things that came out of the last one was just the importance of having regular drills in place every few months at the head office level as well as at the vessel level. And the question to ask yourself as to whether you need to be doing these drills more often is, let's just say, for example, your work laptop, work phone, your normal workstation in the office, all of a sudden you got locked out of all of those. Who would you call? Or how would you alert the CEO?
Yeah.
Or how would the technical superintendent get in touch with you? How would you speak to your lawyer? How would you speak to your insurance provider? If you can't answer those questions, how would you do external comms if you've been locked out of everything? If you can't answer those questions, you need to do some drills because you'll find that there's a lot of things that suddenly just completely fall apart once you lose access to that infrastructure.
Yeah, it was interesting because I was digging into this because I've kind of like been in discussions before where it's like the whole concept of this. I mean, I think sometimes people kind of feel like it's a little bit of a desktop exercise, but I've got a feeling that it's probably not, because there'd be all sorts of things, like you said, once you start going, right, because of this, we've now lost all of those things you've become very reliant on. And then, how do you then get to some sort of resolution or some sort of, upstate? I think it'd be really, I mean, don't want to burden people. We talked about that last week, but it does seem sensible to me that that's part of how we think about things going forward. And it's really interesting. I think we covered this in a previous episode, so I won't go back into too much detail, but if we are talking about revisions to STCW, where we start removing flags, removing celestial navigation, removing sextants and things like that, what happens then when your ship is exposed and floating and unable? And and if you want to know what that looks like, ladies and gentlemen, watch Poop Cruise. Have you seen it?
No. It's come up on Netflix as a suggestion to watch, and my wife and I were both sat there, and we were like, "Oh my god, we have to watch this." Is it?
Yeah, you got to watch it. Yeah, it's good. It's good. It's not cyber related. I guess the title of the show is a bit of a giveaway around what might go wrong.
Can you tell the story a little bit for the listeners? Because I haven't. I will watch it, but I'm curious to hear.
Yeah, so it's a documentary on Netflix, and it's quite a historic incident, I think, that happened a while ago. And it's a cruise vessel which has a fire. Initially, the fire is brought under control, but it's basically burnt through all the cabling, and consequently the ship starts to drift and has no power. But the real big problem with 4,000 passengers on board is that the toilets stop working. And because they're drifting, they can't bring them into port. So they drift for, I think it's 3 days or something.
3 days?
Yeah, I think something like that. I think it was a 4-day cruise originally, and then it ended up.
That's horrific.
And people are kind of being given plastic bags to defecate into. And then when the tugs turn up and once they kind of start pulling the ship, the balance, let's say, the delicate balance of the overfilled toilets is jeopardized.
Tipped over.
Yes. Yeah. It's pretty, I mean, it's a nasty scene. I was doing a webinar last week on Fuel EU and EU ETS.
Right.
And it was a piece of software called Risk Manager, which is made by One Ocean. But when I started looking at what this piece of software does, I was like, this could only be conceived if you were already thinking about, like, software will take care of that. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Because you've got so many dimensions that you're having to think about there in terms of the ports that you're going in and out of, the data that you're having to collect around the efficiency of your voyage and all of that sort of stuff. The price that you're going to pay for the sort of carbon and the price that you're paying for the fuel, and having to balance all of these different kind of elements out. And I was thinking, rule makers are probably assuming a great deal that, that shipping is kind of able to work in the same way as everything else. So they're assuming that kind of connectivity and assuming that. And I started thinking it's an idea that I'd had before when I was thinking about this particular subject. And it was like, are we reaching the tipping point between because software in shipping up until this point, for me, has been, it can make it more efficient. It can save you time. It can, you can produce your reports much faster for your stakeholders. You've got your digital evidence trail. So it's largely been about doing things better. But now I'm actually looking at some of these things now and thinking, like, is it just impossible without it? Obviously, if you've just got because you could do it with spreadsheets, I'm sure, if you had the time and the man hours, and maybe if you have a fairly small number of ships and you have maybe predictable routes and all of that sort of stuff. But like, it's starting to feel to me like it's going to be, technology is going to have to be there for you to be any kind of competitive and to be able to even do this job. Maybe
take that one step further. So we were doing some research recently on the next generation of hydrographic standards, and effectively, to cut a long story short on that front, the likelihood that hydrographic data that is effectively sort of charts as we know them today, hydrographic data will be streamed, potentially even live streamed from a server ashore to the vessel via a satellite connection. That raised the question for us internally of, is the knock-on impact of that potentially that if you go down that route and you become reliant on it, does your connection to the ship then relate to the seaworthiness of the vessel? As in, if the ship goes offline, the SATCOM connection is taken offline for any reason, could the ship potentially then become unseaworthy from a legal standpoint? We'd have to get some genuine legal expertise in to try and answer that question, but it was just an interesting kind of thought experiment of actually like, how reliant are we becoming on these digital tools on board the vessel and ashore? I don't think you can function without using some kind of specialist software in this market anymore. But ships have always been able to kind of go back to the default way of doing things, potentially going all the way back to kind of doing things with paper charts and a range and bearing. But paper charts are coming to an end. And most charting and I'm not even saying charting anymore, most hydrographic data is starting to get delivered via a SATCOM connection. So the kind of next logical step to that is how secure how reliable, I should say, does that SATCOM connection have to be? And could you potentially go down to the route of, it's not about competitiveness, it's actually about the minimum legal compliance you need to be able to operate a ship. You have to invest in digital transformation.
Yes, and a whole lot of other things besides. I mean, yes to everything you've been saying there, because I think, and again, I think we talked about some of this in a previous week as well, where we're like, sort of, you're delegating more and more stuff to technology. It figures, doesn't it, that there's going to be a point at which technology is also has to be kind of a major ingredient to like you said, to seaworthiness or something like that. But it's also like the way in which the SMS kind of develops and how you actually do things.
Just for the listener, when you say SMS, you're talking about the safety management system for the ship, right? So that historically was a set of documents that talk about how the ship should be managed from a safety standpoint. Then it kind of went into a piece of software that lived on the ship. And now increasingly it's becoming kind of a living document that gets managed by both ship and shore, which I think is what you're referring to.
Yeah, because this is documenting, for example, where I often have discussions there is like with training and things like that. If you're putting stuff into your learning management system and you're kind of, and that works a certain way and the exports are run like this way, I mean, that's often written into the safety management system as well. Then that's something that then can be reviewed. We talked about inspections earlier, right? So again, there's probably things happening all the time. And when we think about connectivity, one of the things that strikes me is that there's a lot of fail-safe in there at the moment, like the increasingly there's new kind of options. I guess Starlink being the kind of the most recent one. Inmarsat, I think, have something new. Nexus Wave, I'm not quite sure. I haven't looked at that yet. But there's all these, these things. So it's a pretty robust system these days, and the coverage is pretty good as well. But as you said, with ships, they are a different proposition, really. There's many more complexities, and trying to kind of imagine, or at least having a system that's really that cause kind of to get all the benefits from technology, but is robust enough to be able to kind of have that fail safe is pretty complicated. A lot of moving parts.
Yeah, and a lot of the
that's a bit of an understatement, isn't it? Pretty complicated.
The historical SATCOMs resellers, there's loads of them in the market. A lot of them are now moving to become what I would describe as a kind of IT managed service provider. So in the same way that you have, if you're a small business, you might outsource your IT to a third party and you pay a monthly subscription and they manage all your devices and manage all the network connectivity, all of that sort of stuff. They might manage the Microsoft accounts. I think that's where the SATCOMs market is going. Obviously, on the kind of top end, you've got the likes of Inmarsat with Nexus Wave, which is basically like a managed network. So it uses some LEO, it uses some GEO, and they manage that and make sure you're always online. But then kind of coming one layer down, you've then got managing connectivity and IT together as a single function. And I think that is going to unlock a huge amount of end value for the industry, for those on board and those at sea. And that kind of drawing of the industry getting closer and closer to, if you're on board or you're ashore, your work experience day to day in terms of how you interact with people is the same. So unfortunately, that probably means seafarers spending a lot more time on Microsoft Teams.
Oof. Haven't we done enough to them?
Yeah. We should ban Teams, like seafarers' rights. They'll put up with a lot, but not Microsoft Teams.
Yeah, this is where the line stops. But all this stuff is really fascinating, and I don't think it's looked at or thought about enough, because it stands to reason, right? That the profession has been designed a specific way. It's ancient kind of way of kind of operating. And if you started it from scratch today, you wouldn't do it the way that it's done largely, But it's evolved very, very successfely, and it's overcome all sorts of challenges. COVID being one that we will remember. But and we're also seeing the way in which it has to adjust and work around global events. We're going to see challenges around less predictable weather and all that sort of stuff. And I'm sure again shipping will rise to the challenge. It's rising to the challenges we're seeing of decarbonisation as well. So and one of the things I think that's key to that ability is that largely people have been in control. They've established means of being in control. So having, in the early days, carpenter on board who can do, fix it, the engineer who can machine parts, right? This kind of thing. And that's why I think that, sometimes shipping hasn't necessarily raced ahead with some technologies, because they are capable of being self-sufficient. And that's what's interesting when you start getting into this kind of managed service idea. And I think we've already seen it to a certain degree with things moving much more behind panels that you can't get to, the engineer who used to be able to kind of take everything apart and get their hands dirty, and now things are sort of behind panels and you have to wait for the expert, otherwise you invalidate the warranty and all that sort of stuff. It's already kind of moving in that direction. If you start going into sort of managed services, which can really kind of affect your, as we said in the scenario you were mentioning, that potentially affect the seaworthiness, it's interesting to think about what happens there when that ship is no longer really, and those on that ship are no longer able to kind of be in control so much, and the shipping company themselves also with less control. So it's an interesting challenge whether or not there's a sort of what do they call it? There's a term for it in sociology. Is it Hobbes? I can't remember. Sociology, no anyway, where you surrender. I've gone off on one. Is it Hobbesian? I don't know. The idea basically that I think it's Hobbes. The idea that you surrender some freedom for protection, right? So this is the kind of the choice. And when we started to kind of get together in sort of villages and tribes and civilizations and stuff, you're gaining some, you can no longer be so easily predated on. You have some protection, but you're also giving up a certain amount of freedom to be able to have that protection. That makes sense. And I think it's kind of like similar choice that shipping's facing at the moment is like, there are all these benefits to be had, but you are going to have to relinquish some of your self-sufficiency and some of your control. Yeah. That's quite deep. It's gone quite deep. That is deep.
It does. It reminds me of COVID, and like I remember going to the supermarket and seeing really empty shelves, and I did kind of have a thought. I was like, if the supermarket runs out of food, I am literally just going to starve. I'm a completely useless human being when it comes to like general survival. So I'm fully. I'm still not 100% sure what the word was. I'm fully Hobbesed. I've fully given up my freedom in exchange for being able to order on Deliveroo. Have we got time to do one more?
Well, we can if we cut something else out. So yeah, go for it. I'm sure there's some crap in there we can cut out. So yeah,
I'll do one quick one. I just wanted to flag that I think we might be approaching peak AI hype. Now I don't really know anything about football, but I know that when Real Madrid signed Ronaldo from Man United back in something like that, it broke a record, $80 million spent to sign the man. There's a recent announcement that Meta has paid a guy called Jihu Yu $100 million as a signing bonus to move from OpenAI and join Meta. So we're now getting to the point where AI researchers are being paid like footballers, which just seems totally mad to me.
Wow. That's how much did you say?
$100 million.
$1 million.
That's just the signing
Transfer
bonus.
fee.
Well, I think it's a signing bonus to him as an individual, actually.
Okay. So they didn't have to buy him off of someone. He wasn't like, he wasn't enslaved. He wasn't sort of like, okay. I was thinking, how did that work as a transfer? So, but my God. So come and work for us and we'll give you 100 million. He's not going to be massively motivated, though, is he? I wouldn't, like, it's nice to be welcomed, but like, this man has very little incentive, unless he's got something he needs to spend £1 million on for the next sort of 100 years or whatever.
If it's 100 million as the signing
That's
bonus,
mad.
I imagine his pay is going to stretch into a few $100 million a year. Absolutely.
But your framing of it is exactly right. Like, because surely that is all about, like, what's the word for it? Like that. This has to be about the kind of race for supremacy between all these big companies who look at this now and see, they did the land grab with social, they did the land grab with e-com or whatever, and now they're looking at this and saying, wow, this is the potential extinction event. I was saying to somebody last night, I feel like this is really the thing in shipping right now. Similar kind of thing. Where so much is going on, so many things are changing, old established things are, there are some plays to be had in here where fortunes could be made and companies could be just wiped out. I think
I've spoken about sort of technology windows on this in a previous episode, right? But I think that there are moments for particular technology, and I think we are at the very beginning of the kind of business application layer for the AI technology window. And we're already seeing some companies really take advantage of that and move very, very quickly. Bill Doby over at Sedna put a post out on LinkedIn last week where they've created an MCP, which is a model context protocol, which basically, using a tool like OpenAI at one end, it is a framework that's a bit like an API that allows an agent to interact with OpenAI or interact with a large language model. So it allows the AI to interact with the application on the other end. So it's no longer just a chat back and forth. It's a interaction between an application and an agent. And the stuff they've been able to do with that, for example, taking fleet lists out of an email and then posting them directly into the VSON IMOS API to update position lists or update vessel information that's coming into the email inbox automatically without any kind of touch by human hands. So I think the optimistic version of that is that if you embrace this stuff, there is a huge amount of opportunity, probably for the next 3 to 5 years. An enormous amount of value is going to be created. And I agree. The pessimistic version of that is that if you do nothing, you will be disrupted.
Yeah. But the positive thing is that there's that opportunity window that you're talking about now. And this is the concern, I think. And this is where I certainly feel like it's going to be super important to take a step back, to kind of come out of what you've got your head down in and what you're doing, and take a look out there and see where's the really smart plays. Because I think it could be really, it could be a gold rush, really. Yay!
Yeah, I think it will be.
That's a high.
Right.
It's going to be a gold rush.
Yeah, we'll end on a high then. Let's end on a high. As always, stick a comment for your suggested ship names for the Amon ships. Amon Bulk 1 and Amon Bulk 2 is
those bulk carriers.
There's nothing we can do. If you suggest something great, we'll talk about it on here. But beyond that, who knows whether they'll get used. And also keep the reviews coming in, keep the comments coming in other places. It genuinely is thoroughly appreciated. And have a wonderful week. Anything I've missed, Raal?
No, just to say, we haven't talked about it this week, but we are lining up some people to join the conversation for a little stop and chat. So again, if you're, and we've got some exciting names in there, so we'll hopefully be able to talk about that in the next couple of weeks. Until then,
awesome.
Ta-ta.
You haven't got your sign off yet, have you? Can you also, never mind ship names, just please give Raal a sign off because he's got no idea what to say. I'll just say bye-bye.
Yeah, bye.